Welcome to episode 1 of Academic Alchemy, the show where we talk with various members of our academic community at SNHU's College of Online and Continuing Education and discover how academic philosophy and other elements of the higher ed landscape coalesce. I'm Alexis Morton. I'm a manager of faculty training and development, and I'm joined today by Jaymes Myers, our Assistant Vice President of Learning Science and Assessment. Today, we're having a conversation about what goes into creating our classes. So thank you so much for joining us today, Jaymes. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks, Alexis.
As we're looking at what goes into creating our courses, what sort of initial thoughts happen around the construction of a course?
Yeah, so we get this question a lot, and I think there's a lot of interest in how our designers go about the design process and what we're responsible for. So I work with both an instructional design team as well as a team of curriculum designers who assist us on the curriculum structure for our programs. And the outcomes, the student learning outcomes that we are trying to achieve through both our courses and then as they feed into our programs and as we learn a little bit more about what we're trying to prepare our students for in the disciplines or professions that they're going into. So our approach really is to start with the end in mind, and this is probably familiar to lots of folks who have encountered research into learning design. We have a backward design approach, which means that we really start with the idea of what is it that our students are expected to perform in real world or authentic settings, real world in quotation marks.
Sure, exactly. And so how do you know what they're going to approach in the real world? We sit in our brick/ivory tower. And so how do we really know what a student will run into in their own profession?
Yeah, kind of our brick building sitting by the river. We have to interview subject matter experts for that. So we bring in lots of experts throughout the design process. Quite a few folks are going to help conceptualize with us what is going on for a degree program and how should the structure of our courses support the right types of skills and abilities that folks would be expected to achieve. So it starts with a broad group of subject matter experts, and these can range from leaders in the industry to faculty members in comparable programs that we're trying to offer ourselves, to on-the-ground practitioners. And we usually try to get a pretty good sampling across those groups, so both academically and professionally informed people. Start with a wide net, and then as we get closer and closer to individual course design, then we usually hone in on folks that are supremely qualified for the particular skills and abilities that we're trying to support for a given course.
Sure. So as you look at sort of that wide net approach, who do you look for in the wide net versus who do you look for as you get more specialized?
Yeah, so like I said, we usually try to start with folks who have kind of the 10,000 foot view of the industry. So people who have been embedded in the industry, who have a wide network of people that they work with, who are informed about not just what's happening today, but what is going to be happening in 5 to 10 to 15 years. And it is important that we get that perspective because we are preparing students for the future of those industries, not necessarily the current state. So we do look for folks who I think can give us a little insight, look through the crystal ball in their own industry and help us prepare for future trends, not just current trends.
Absolutely. So they really have to sort of have that history in the industry to know whether there are cycles or, just like you said, what trends are coming forward or emerging.
Exactly. Yep. And folks who have that view, I think, are really, really, really important because they have that broad-based understanding. What's interesting, however, is you get folks who are at the 10,000-foot view, and often they forget actually how to do the work. So we do cast that net with an idea that we also have to have folks who are on the ground, who are practitioners, who are doing some of the day-to-day work, who can bring us back to what kind of a practitioner's
the day-to-day
perspective is going to be.
Yeah, the how-to of the really granular pieces that make up the larger objectives then.
Exactly. Yep. And so that allows us to do more of an in-depth job task analysis, and that's particularly important for professions in, say, STEM, so science, technology, engineering, math, those high-tech professions, as well as healthcare. We really do need to know what are the specific steps people take to prepare patients for any kind of situation which they're going to encounter. If we're preparing folks to be health promotion advocates, what are the considerations they need to make with regard to laws and policies? So there are really, really important detailed skills that we need to be able to understand, as well as what those larger trends are. So a good kind of marriage between those two perspectives is what we're looking for at that broad-based programmatic level.
Absolutely. So then as you're thinking, the broad program and breaking down then into course objectives, what do you look for in a course, and how does a designer sort of take those ideas from the SMEs and then translate that? What happens in that process? Yeah,
so this is a really fun process, I think, for both our designers and our subject matter experts. One, because you kind of get to enter into a conversation about the art of the possible, right? You really get to be able to sit down and say, you know what, we've got kind of a clean slate here for a course. We've got a blank canvas. What could be possible here? And there are some constraints there, and I think that's something that we'll talk about. But the first questions are really around what are some of the keystone experiences that you would expect a professional in this field to be able to produce or encounter. And often we build a course really around that keystone experience, and that becomes what we call our summative assessment. So the project that students are working toward. And that gives us a good target for the course, but it also then provides the scaffolding that we need. So the specific activities and the learning pathway that is going to help support students in creating or producing or being able to kind of assess themselves in one of those keystone projects.
Sure. So they sort of then pick up these skills through the different activities throughout the course, leading up to, as you had said, scaffolding and thinking of that building and very, very much the metaphor and looking at the pieces that then come together at different levels to form that final building or project.
And how this differs from, I think, a lot of the courses that we probably encountered in our own academic experience is we don't really start with the idea of a central text for a course. And it has been, I think, very easy, and it's been very common for faculty members to utilize a kind of a guiding textbook as a content for a course and build their weekly modules around that experience. This is really around the performance. We want to understand what is it that our students are expected to do, how would we measure that performance effectively, and what would determine that to be kind of an authentic, or at least as close to authentic as possible of an experience. And then we're going to be looking for content that supports that. And that could very well take the form of a supporting central text. Many of our textbooks, especially our digital offerings today, have pushed the boundaries of kind of how we support students effectively and have really broken out of that mode of kind of memory and recall. And are really looking toward more performance-based experiences, and so there's a lot of content out there that supports what we're headed toward, even when we are thinking we're doing something fairly unique here, and we often are.
Absolutely.
So there's a good combination, I think, of things that are differentiated in our model, as well as some of the classical things that we can rely on that are going to help support our students.
Sure. So when you talk about that differentiation, and, I think oftentimes of my own teaching a while back, where, like you said, it's sort of built off of the text rather than built off of the objectives or outcomes that we hope to see students gain. So when you talk about that differentiation, what are you hoping to see that students get and that faculty can really convey?
Yeah, one of the things that we have said in our team is that we know we will be successful when it comes to student learning when a student themselves can articulate their own strengths and weaknesses according to our learning outcomes. When they are able to assess themselves and they're able to say, this is what I still need to work on, and this is where I really excel. And we know that to be a sign of success in many ways, because a student has become proficient enough in the expectations and the outcomes expected of them that they can cognitively or they have worked out some kind of schema to be able to say, I understand the relationships between these things, and I understand what qualifies as a successful versus an unsuccessful performance, and I know where I have and have not achieved those things. So what we're really looking for is students' ability to assess themselves using and being informed by our experts' assessment. So that still remains to be important. This doesn't mean that we're saying that our students can say, yep, I think I got it, and move on. There's a context through which they're working through this. But we really hope that I think at the in key places, I think in the degree program, we're hoping that students can use that reflection to be able to say, no, this is really what I need to focus on. And I understand my strengths and weaknesses as it relates to this specific profession and this specific discipline. And that, I think, is a really important thing that will instill lifelong learning, will bring our students in as partners in the learning experience. It really disrupts kind of that transmission model of education, that we're not here to just kind of put knowledge in your brain. This is an exchange, and sometimes a painful exchange.
Absolutely.
When students, I think, are able to be articulate partners in that agreement, that is really, I think, a sign of overall success.
Absolutely. And I love that idea of that partnership in learning, and the fact that they're able to really assimilate all of the concepts that are coming their way and assess and really have a strong understanding of what's expected in the field. And then to be able to, like you said, really assess where am I along that continuum. That's just a very empowering and very transformative nature of the education. Like you said, sometimes that transformation can be painful. You had mentioned before, we do have some constraints as we're building and constructing and partnering and figuring out ways to be partners in that learning process. So what sort of constraints do you see at this stage in our evolution? Yeah,
so this is another question that we get quite a bit, is either it's posed as a question of why can't you make your courses look like this, right? These fancy design models that we see, or why can't, as an instructor, why can't I just teach my own course? Just give me the syllabus and I'll teach the course, and I'll create the content, and I'll create the information. And there are models, I think, that are successful in both of those arenas. The one thing that we are really that we put as kind of a central point in our design is the ability for our learning experiences to scale and support a diversity of students. And both of those things, I think, are really critical in our model. So we design for online first for the vast majority of our courses. which means that we are not, say, translating a course from a face-to-face experience and then seeing how that would play out online. We take online first as our guiding framework. So we know that we're not trying to reproduce, in many cases, a lecture-style experience for students. So we do stay away from kind of a talking head type of a video framework where an expert faculty member would be talking at a student, and then we would be kind of assessing students' recollection of those concepts.
Right.
So that's both a constraint and an affordance. So that means that we start very much with students' engagement with content, students' engagement with each other, and students' engagement with our faculty. And those three things are central tenets in our design. We are, I think, in a place where we do have to acknowledge the end user and their abilities and their availability of technology. So we can get very fancy in our design experiences. There are a lot of tools I think that we could be using that are common tools that are out there. I get asked a lot about synchronous video. So can we hold synchronous conferences with our students and have everyone be recording themselves and kind of have this experience where it's a live, collaborative experience? And I think it's a really important experience for lots of different types of assessments and activities. And it's something that we have done. It's something that we have not done very commonly. And in particular, because we know that our students are accessing their content in a lot of different ways, and they're accessing their content at all times of the day. And we are working with students who work night shifts, and they're doing their work.
And not only night shifts, but night shifts across the country.
Across the seas, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And
so,
overseas.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, we are, we work with a large group of students who are on active military. And are on bases stationed everywhere. So I think it's really important that we understand what our students have available to them. And there are some dictations of that technology, but it does limit us. We're not going to put our students in a situation where they have to have access to the kind of most expensive, most up-to-date video and recording and hardware in our computers. We want to remain as accessible as possible with that regard. In addition to that, and another feature of accessibility is understanding how our students are able to access the content itself. And so we really do take great care in finding ways to ensure that we have equal accessibility in a vast array of formats, depending on students' abilities. So that is a critical factor for us, and something that does require us to think very carefully about the choices we make with regard to how interactive are certain elements of the course, how synchronous are some elements of the course, and then what technology are we expecting our students to use.
Right. So just coming back to that point of engagement, as you had mentioned, we think from an online first perspective, and rather than being a translation of the face-to-face type of lecture. But you mentioned engagement, and that seems like it's, I know certainly teaching, that's a big deal. But when you say engaging students with one another and engaging them with the content and engaging them with the instructor, what forms does that engagement take on, and why is it really important? What do we know about engagement? Yeah,
so I mean, I think to the last question, what we do know about engagement is it is one of the primary indicators of student success. When students are engaged with the content, when they are submitting their work, when they understand the value of that work, they are going to be successful. There are very few instances where we see that students who have not been engaged have been able to, I think, navigate our courses as successfully as those who remain thoughtfully and critically engaged with each other and with the content. So the forms that it takes are vary, I think, greatly from course to course. A common way that we do keep students engaged and keep them kind of on pace in the courses have been through discussion forums, and that continues to be, I think, a really valuable tool. What we are trying to disrupt, I think, in most recent course designs is ensuring that it remains as thoughtful of an engagement tool as anything else. We have students, I think, that fall into a pattern of, and even our faculty members, I think in some cases, and our designers fall into a pattern of saying, we want students to be engaged with the material this week, so let's pose kind of a general question about the material and have students respond to the discussion forum, then respond to one another. And that serves a purpose. We want to be, I think, very thoughtful in how they do that. And so we have played around with and tested, I think, a few different ways that we have managed, say, a discussion forum experience. We played around with things like kind of mock debates in the discussion forum. So students having to take on a particular position in some kind of debate or argument or tension. We played around with role-based discussions where students do have to kind of take on a role and then come up with some kind of solution from the perspective of the roles that they have been assigned. And that, I think, is really important just from a role-playing experience, as well as understanding perspective taking, both, I think, in the debate style and in the role-based style, understanding that folks are going to approach solutions in different ways based off of the goals and perspectives that they bring to the table.
Certainly.
And then we've also played around with time-based kind of situational discussions. So there are some tools and technology, I think, that we are playing around with regard to adaptive release of materials or things like that, which allow us to have situational type discussions or branching kind of scenario-based discussions. And that's a way for us to, I think, emulate in many cases some of the experiences that students are going to have that are not as clean or as kind of structured as the real world, again in quotation marks, is for them. So that's a way, I think, that we use one forum, one common tool, I think, to enhance engagement. Some of the other things that we've been taking a look at is giving students and faculty a better understanding of their progress, of student progress. And that, I think, is an important way to encourage engagement.
Right.
There's a lot of research coming out around gamification of courses and things like that. And there's plenty of ways in which I think we still need to test what is the value and purpose of kind of gamified elements in courses.
Right.
One of the things that we do know, however, is short-term wins are really important. Think about your own goal setting. We just kind of hit the new year, folks setting resolutions.
Right.
It's really important that you kind of understand what the short-term wins are. And resolutions are something that are always kind of a long-term goal. And we know that people who are successful in keeping those resolutions are those who understand what their short-term goals are within it, and then allow themselves to be able to measure their progress and understand that. And so I think that's one of the really important ways that we can enhance engagement.
So what do you see as those short-term wins? How do we help our students really see that? How do we help faculty see that students are having those short-term wins and reinforcing them? What do we do?
Yeah, so we're still, I think, figuring this out. I think we know that students are going to continue to place some level of importance on a grade, right? And that is a system that dictates a lot of things for us, and again is one of the constraints and one of the affordances that we have.
Sure.
And so I think it is important for us to understand that the experience of grading is and will continue to be an important measure of progress, as well as a way to reward, in many cases, a student achievement. So I think what we're trying to do is understand how do we give students better insight into their progress as a function of the overall whole in a course as well as the program through their grading schema so that it doesn't feel like they're waiting until the very end of the course to kind of understand, are they on track? So it is important for us to scaffold that experience so that they kind of see within a few short weeks, they can see where they're at.
Absolutely. And I think, just as you were saying, in terms of the short-term wins, seeing the wins of a module or two, or have I met these learning objectives yet, within the broader scope of the whole, 8 or 10 week term, and just knowing, just as you were saying, that they've been successful prior to the end of that term.
Exactly.
So just thinking about the design process and kind of coming back full circle, for faculty, what do you want them to know just as a very broad sweep about the design process and how it fosters their ability to teach effectively? Yeah,
so this is really, really, really important. And I think this is an ongoing conversation that I really love to have with faculty, because we don't get, I think, enough experiences as designers to be working with faculty on kind of a day-to-day experience inside the courses. We do a lot of evaluation of the courses after they have rolled out, and we do a lot of interviewing of many faculty members, but we don't always kind of get to live the life alongside a faculty member. And so there's a lot of things that I think we can continue to learn. One of the things that I think is really important that guides a lot of our responses to this question is kind of how can a faculty effectively utilize our model in their own teaching, and how can they support it? Our model is based off of kind of a designed, curated content experience. And so the course itself already includes the essential content that we expect students to encounter. It includes the assignments and assessments that students are expected to complete. It includes the evaluation criteria that we use to evaluate effectively student achievement according to those. And so faculty members can often encounter that, particularly those who have designed their own courses and feel very constrained by that model. And I think one of the things that is really critical for us is there is still a vacuum missing in that model, which is the faculty-student engagement. And what we hope is that, and the intention behind the design model and design process itself, is that we are centralizing our focus for our faculty members on the student. That we are about understanding what does the student need when it comes to their particular learning outcomes, their particular skills and prerequisite skills that they're bringing to the table. And then being able to work individually with those students to guide them through that experience. There is quite a bit of teaching that still happens in that experience, and there's quite a bit of teaching that is essential to that experience that is not necessarily requiring kind of a new content. The relationship that faculty have with students is essential. We are not designing self-paced experiences. We're designing very intentionally that there is a faculty, a mentor, guide, teacher that is assisting students along the way. And that is also finding ways to enhance that students' learning based on their need, with the expertise, with the content, with the tools and resources that they can also bring to the table. We're not assuming that courses have all solutions in them. What we are assuming is that the courses provide a baseline standard that is well researched, that is well validated by subject matter experts, that ensures some level of equivalency of student education as they're moving through. But we don't expect any one individual student's experience to be like any others. And that is where the faculty member comes in, I think, on that individual basis with the student.
And that's a really, it's an important assumption that we do make, that each faculty member has a different influence and finds different ways of engaging with students. And just like you said, we're making the assumption, and I think it's a fair assumption, that no student is going to have the same experience, even with the same professor, with the same curriculum.
Absolutely.
So that I think is just a huge piece, knowing that as a faculty member, I have that autonomy and that power to really help that student transform.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jaymes. This has really been an amazing conversation, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
This podcast is offered through the Department of Faculty Training and Development here at COCE. If you have ideas for future podcast episodes and/or shows, we encourage you to submit these ideas through our online adjunct faculty portal or via email at facultytraining@snhu.edu. Thank you for listening, and join us next time.